Good to have you back. July 7th, 2016. Let's get started now with chapters 10 and 11 on heroes and heroines. The first thing I would like you to do is to please pause your video and pull out the other textbook, the one by Ken Dowden, called The Uses of Greek Mythology. I would like you to please turn in that textbook to page 146. We're actually going to look at three of the pages, 146, 147, and 148. So please pause your video, find your Dowden textbook, and turn there to pages 146, 147, and 148. Please pause your video. Okay, do you have those pages? You will see there a list of the steps that frequently occur in the story of a hero. We talked about that somewhat before, about how there are familiar patterns with the way that hero tales go. Back in chapter 2 when we were discussing narratology, you may remember that I cited Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, Percy Jackson. There are, of course, numerous others, King Arthur, the Wart and the Stone, many other things that come, the Sword and the Stone. Many others that we have. So essentially, hero and heroine mythology is really based on specific patterns that come up in society as well as in the minds of Greek storytellers. And I'm just simply going to run through examples of the hero-heroine patterns as described for you in chapters 10 and 11 of your Harris Plotzer textbook, so that you can get some ideas of how the Greeks conceived of heroes, some of their good points and bad points together, and what it probably meant for the Greeks to have heroes and heroines like these in their society. First of all, probably the most famous of all, Heracles. Now the curious thing about Heracles is that although he's the most celebrated of heroes, and probably his 12 labors, which are of course the most celebrated aspect of him, were certainly impressive feats, there's a couple of weird things about Heracles. First of all is the fact that those labors are usually described to us as having been a punishment for Heracles' murder of his family, his wife and children, as a result of madness driven on him by, guess who? Hera. Because once again, Heracles was a son of Zeus from someone other than Hera. In fact, the lady's name was Alcmene. Even the circumstances behind the birth are a little peculiar, because Heracles was actually in a cradle with his very weak baby brother Iphicles, and Heracles sent two snakes into the cradle to try to strangle Heracles, and all that happened was that he woke up and he probably started giggling, and like these two wonderful little toys, and he grabs the two snakes and he just basically squeezes them and strangles them. So much for that. But Heracles is indeed known for the 12 labors, as well as performing numerous other tasks all around the Greek world. He's actually also one of the very few heroes who ascends to immortality on Mount Olympus. After the 12 labors, he actually sacked a city called Oikalia, and he made the unfortunate mistake. He had already been married to a woman named Deianira at that time. He made the unfortunate mistake of sending home a woman named Iole. And Deianira, by that time, had received from a centaur named Nessus a love salve, supposedly. It was actually taken from the blood of Nessus, and that came about because when Heracles first got to marry Deianira, he was taking her home across a river. Nessus the centaur offered to take Deianira across the river. Turns out you can never trust centaurs anywhere in the company of beautiful women, of course, not surprisingly. After all, they are beasts. So Nessus tries to rape Deianira. Heracles shoots an arrow from the shore, and of course, naturally, because it's Heracles shooting it, it hits him. The arrow was actually poisoned with the blood of the Hydra, an earlier 9-headed monster that Heracles had defeated. So Nessus told Deianira, whispered in her ear, "Take my blood. It will help you to get Heracles back if he ever falls in love with another woman." Deianira believed him. I'm not sure that was really very smart, but that's the way Greek women might have been possibly in some cases. In any event, Deianira took the salve, and when Heracles in fact sent Iole home, Deianira daubed a cloak with this blood and sent it to Heracles. He went to perform a sacrifice. There was a fire on an altar. He put on the cloak, and it consumed him alive. Well, the way to rescue the situation there was that Heracles' body went down to the underworld, but his soul actually did ascend to Mount Olympus. And again, he was one of the very few. As it turns out, Heracles ended up marrying another daughter of Zeus and Hera named Hebe, or Youth. So as it finally turned out, Hera was reconciled with Heracles. She became his mother-in-law. I think that anybody is a great hero who can withstand Hera as mother-in-law. That's extraordinarily impressive. Anyway, that's Heracles. Jason, not so great. Jason went off to the Eastern world, practically the edge of the Greek world, in order to catch the golden fleece. He was sent there by his evil uncle Peleus, who had taken away the rule of the Thessalian city Iolcus from Jason's own father Aeson, Peleus' brother. And so Jason came back in order to claim the throne and was told, go get the golden fleece and then you'll get the rule back. So Jason very reluctantly takes a whole group of heroes with him on board a very fast ship called the Argo, which is what Argo meant in Greek, and off he went. When he got out to the city called Colchis, way over on the eastern edge of the Black Sea, the king Aeetes told Jason, but of course I'll be more than happy to give away this extremely valuable, rare golden fleece. Naturally, all you have to do is take dragon's teeth, yoke these two bulls over here that absolutely kill every man that comes anywhere near them, yoke them, they breathe fire. I mean, you may get singed a little bit, but don't worry about that. Breathe fire and drive these bulls, sew these teeth. That's all you have to do, and you get the fleece. That was a little hard for Jason to imagine himself doing. So enter Medea. Medea is the daughter of King Aeetes, and little baby Cupid, you know, the son of Aphrodite, shoots an arrow at Medea. She falls in love with Jason. So she helps Jason by putting the dragon to sleep with a spell. Imagine a more wimpy way to be defeated than with a spell by a woman witch. Anyway, so Medea helps Jason to get the fleece, and they sail away. She even invites her brother Absyrtus for a meeting to talk about things, about the fact that she betrayed her father. Then Jason ends up stepping out of the meeting place, out of hiding, and kills Absyrtus, and they scatter the, sparagmos, see, scattering. They scatter the body parts so that King Aeetes, in chasing after Medea and Jason, has to stop and pick them up, and thereby Jason and Medea get away. Well, Jason ends up getting to the city of Corinth eventually after a few more misadventures, and falls in love with the daughter of the king, Creon. The daughter's name is Creusa. Jason falls in love with her and deserts Medea. Not a good thing. Medea sends Creusa for the wedding a gold robe and a gold crown. It might have occurred to somebody, I don't know why it didn't, that gold happens to be the same color as fire. Obviously, when you receive things from Medea, you are supposed to realize that she's a witch, and you're supposed to realize that gold things from her have something to do with fire. It's obvious. You're supposed to understand these things in advance, because if you don't, you get killed. Well, Creusa didn't understand any of this, as it turns out. So the very naive girl puts on the cloak, puts on the crown, gets burned to a crisp, and so does her father Creon. And so Medea flees off on a very conveniently provided dragon chariot from her grandfather the sun off to Athens, because the king of Athens, Aegeus, had very conveniently previously told Medea that she could flee there to him if she ever got into trouble doing something wrong, like, you know, murder. And Jason is left deserted as a result. So Jason's story is not a very happy one. Theseus is a little better off, but he has his problems too. Well, he does go down to Crete and defeat the Minotaur. The Minotaur is a half-man, half-bull beast. King Minos of Crete, of Knossos, was punishing the Athenians because they had accidentally killed his son Androgeus. So the punishment was send 9 men, 9 women every 7 years to Crete so that they could go into the labyrinth and get gobbled up by this monster. And of course the labyrinth was very complicated and couldn't be navigated properly. So sure, Theseus goes in place of one of the 7 men, and he ends up getting into the labyrinth, and he kills the Minotaur. Well, he does have some help, though. He has some help from Ariadne, who is, interestingly, the half-sister of the Minotaur, because she's also Minos' daughter. So she is so discouraged at the way the Minotaur acts, and her father acts, that she assists Theseus to go in the labyrinth by providing him with a sword to kill the Minotaur and a ball of string to unravel as he goes through the labyrinth. He gets in, finds the Minotaur, slaughters it, finds his way out, but then the promise was that he would take her on the ship with him as he fled. They left. It was at night, so they stopped at an island, which is possibly the island of Naxos or some mythical island called Dia, probably the same place. They stopped there, and then the story goes that someone saw a ship off in the distance, and they hurried back to the ships in a rush, and Theseus, unfortunately, despite his pleas, discovered that he had left behind Ariadne by accident, and therefore could not get her. That's one story. There are other versions, however, to suggest that Theseus had deliberately left her behind because a Cretan princess would never be accepted if he ever wanted to become king of Athens. And of course, he expected to be after his father Aegeus. So, problem. So Theseus ends up actually becoming king of Athens in a rather unfortunate way, because as punishment for leaving Ariadne behind, a curse comes down on him from Jupiter, if it's the Roman story, or Zeus, the Greek story, and he forgets his promise. Now, what was the promise? The promise was made to his father Aegeus when he sailed off to Crete, that the ship that he was going to go on was going to have a black sail on it. Black sail. The sail was meant to keep pirates away because of the special mission it was on. The sail would need to be changed to a white sail to tell his father, watching from a cliff near Athens, that Theseus had successfully escaped. The problem was, when Theseus deserted Ariadne, Jupiter or Zeus caused him to forget his promise, and as a result, the ship sailed back to Athens with a black sail. And Aegeus saw this, thought Theseus had been consumed by the Minotaur in the labyrinth, and jumped overboard, jumped over a cliff, and fell into the Aegean Sea, named after him. Of course, he died. So Theseus became king of Athens in a rather disreputable way. He actually, however, became a very successful king of Athens, and he's featured very prominently in a play of Sophocles, the tragic playwright, that play called Oedipus at Colonus. It was the last play, in fact, that Sophocles produced. So there's Theseus. Now you notice that these guys are off traveling and depend on brute strength to do their great stuff. Odysseus is a little different. Odysseus isn't so strong, he's witty and clever. He is the one credited with crafting the Trojan horse after all the other Greek heroes who might have helped defeat Troy had all died. So Odysseus has that, and he also is the one who gets all of his men on the way home to Ithaca into a cave, the Cyclops. It was not very smart of him to bring them in there in the first place, but as he did, he found a witty way to get back out by blinding the Cyclops and then hiding his men under all of the Cyclops' sheep, so that when the Cyclops took the sheep out, they all got out as well. So that's Odysseus. He was indeed very clever, and his wife Penelope, who was waiting for him in Ithaca for 20 years, is just as clever, because her way of keeping a whole bunch of suitors away from her, who all want her to choose a new husband because they think Odysseus is dead after a long absence, her way of keeping them all at bay is to say, just wait, I need to finish weaving a shroud for Odysseus. The thing that she was doing, of course, was weaving the shroud, but then unraveling it at night. It was clever, but just shortly before Odysseus' arrival home, one of the maids caught on to the trick and informed the suitors. That maid, by the way, would not survive too much longer. And Penelope had to find another way to trick the suitors, and she actually did so. She told the suitors to line up and try to string this bow that belonged to Odysseus to shoot arrows, and it turned out that none of them could string it properly. Unbeknownst to any of them, including even Penelope, Odysseus was actually already in the crowd, disguised as a beggar. Goddess Athena had seen to that. And Odysseus picked up the bow, strung it, and then he proceeds to shoot an arrow through a whole string of axe handles that all have little loops on them, like right through. And thereafter, he and his son Telemachus pick up their arrows and a few axes, and they turn on the suitors and cut down every single one of them. So in this case, ingenuity worked very nicely for Odysseus and his wife Penelope, and eventually they were indeed reunited. And Perseus is your basic quintessential hero. He is born in a rather strange circumstance. Zeus comes to his mother Danae in the form of a shower of gold. See, that's how it's done. The point there is that Danae had been imprisoned by her father because her father had been informed that his grandson, that is the son of his daughter, would kill him. And so, as a result, Danae is imprisoned, but then Zeus infiltrates the dungeon in the form of a shower of gold. Danae all of a sudden has a son. The son is named Perseus, whose name, interestingly, in Greek, by the way, means the slayer or the sacker of cities. It's actually a very violent name, more so than one might realize. One should know that when one reads Percy Jackson, by the way. So, in any event, Danae and Perseus are now thrown out to the sea by her father. His name is Chryseis. And while they're floating out at sea, they eventually drift ashore at Samos. And it turns out that the tyrant of Samos has a very nasty appetite and wants Danae. So Perseus has to go and slaughter Medusa, who is this famous wicked woman with snake hair. And she is the one who turns men to stone anytime they look upon her face. You may remember Aunt M, the Emporium in Percy Jackson. So Perseus now has to go and kill Medusa. The way he gets to do it is that he receives winged sandals, plus also a sword from Athena. And when he gets to Medusa herself, he's able to look into the shield like this as a mirror reflection and watches carefully behind him until eventually he finds her and is able to cut her down that way in order to get rid of her. And of course, quite famously, Perseus is also associated with Andromeda, the poor lady who was chained to a stone off of Egypt, while this monster, the Krakon in Clash of the Titans, came to consume her. But Perseus was able by then, because he had the Gorgon's head, to go over and find the Krakon and pull out the head and turn him to stone. And that is how Perseus eventually was able to marry Andromeda. So those are your heroes. You'll notice that there's a lot of imperfection with these heroes. And sometimes also, you'll find that heroes often leave destruction in their wake. When Jason in particular is sailing out to Colchis, he actually stops at a city called Cyzicus. When he gets there, the people of Cyzicus welcome him warmly. The king is also named Cyzicus, and he and his daughter Clytie entertain Jason at the palace. When they leave at night, they get blown back ashore by a storm. Unfortunately, nobody realizes on either side that they've been blown ashore back to the very same place they just left. The people of Cyzicus attack the ship. Eventually, a big battle breaks out. The king comes down, and unfortunately, the king is killed in battle, and the daughter, Clytie, hangs herself in suicide. So sometimes the hero's advent to a location brings tragedy or destruction or death to that particular location. So that's the heroes. Notice that also the men are always capable of taking initiative. Contrast that with the women. Clytemnestra takes the initiative of avenging herself against her husband Agamemnon when Agamemnon kills their daughter Iphigenia, apparently her favorite one. And so she takes a role that is no longer the passive women's role. She steps out of that role in order to kill her husband. Besides the murder, the fact of her taking initiative that way is itself a very, very bad thing. When Antigone, the daughter of King Oedipus, wants to bury her brother Polynices, who had attacked the city of Thebes because his brother Eteocles had refused to allow him his own turn for ruling over the city of Thebes. And then King Creon had decreed that Polynices' body had to be out in the street to be eaten by crows. Antigone wanted to rectify that as the sister by giving her brother a proper burial, even though it was disallowed by the state. Her sister Ismene tells her in Sophocles' play Antigone, we can't do that. We're women. We can't stand up against the state. And Antigone says, no, 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 no. This is the right of the gods. The gods require that family members be buried by other family members, not sit out like this. So there's a conflict there with the role of women. Where do they actually belong? So Antigone is stepping out of her position as a woman in order to carry out that act. Well, Clytemnestra does it too much. Medea, in her own way, also does it too much. Curiously, though, she gets off scot-free in doing it, but she would certainly be hardly worshipped as a heroine. Ariadne is sort of a hybrid. She's passive in the sense that Theseus comes her way, and then, as we said, the advent of the hero disturbs the order of things in the place where he arrives. So Ariadne ends up abandoning her old life in order to accompany Theseus, and the jerk, of course, leaves her behind. It works out well for Ariadne, though, because guess who shows up? Dionysus, the party animal. Dionysus brings her up to Mount Olympus. And aside from the fact that she survives her ordeal, aside from the fact that she gets up to Mount Olympus, aside from the fact that she's celebrated for years afterwards because her crown is placed in the sky as a constellation called Corona Borealis, aside from all that, those are wonderful things. But how better could you possibly spend the rest of your days than as the wife of your great husband, Dionysus, the wine god? There's just no better way to wrap things up. Even so, though, it obviously was a terrible fate for her to be abandoned on an island like that. Penelope, long-suffering. She's probably one of the best heroines, though, because she stays at home and she does all of her good work at home. And that's the big thing with the Greeks, is that women will do great things within the household, and they'll have effect that way. And finally, we have Psyche. Psyche is actually a Roman myth, and she has to carry out a whole group of tasks for Venus, her not-so-great mother-in-law, because she ends up married to Cupid, Venus' son. The problem here is that Psyche was so beautiful that everybody told everybody else, oh, she's more beautiful than Venus. So Venus was jealous of her. So Psyche has to carry out a bunch of tasks for Venus and keeps getting help. So she has to sort out a bunch of seeds, but then ants come along and help her to sort the seeds out. Finally, she has to go down to the underworld and get Persephone's beauty, or Proserpina's beauty, Roman mythology, and she does it. It's in a box, but then she comes back out of the underworld, and then unfortunately, it's just like Orpheus again looking behind him. What does she do? She opens the box, just like Pandora, and unfortunately, she goes to sleep. At that moment, however, finally Jupiter steps in when Cupid appeals to him, and Jupiter finally tells his daughter Venus, okay, enough. Allow this marriage to go through. And somehow or another, it works out that Psyche and Cupid are married, and somehow Psyche is reconciled with her mother-in-law, Venus. It's interesting how mother-in-laws keep coming up in these stories. Anyway, I have to mention one last heroine, though. Probably one of the saddest of all the heroines. Her name was Andromache, and she was the wife in Troy of Hector. And Hector was the Trojan hero who attempted to protect Troy from Achilles, the Greek warrior, unfortunately unsuccessfully. We see in book 6 of the work that you're reading tomorrow, called the Iliad, how Hector and Andromache are in fact a very close, very loving husband and wife. It's still evident from the way Hector talks to her that he still considers her a subordinate and a woman. He tells her, go back home, take care of your women's things, leave all the fighting to men. So there's a pretty severe men and women divide, even in this very loving relationship. Nonetheless, though, it's pretty clear that Hector feels very, very dearly toward Andromache, and is really very unhappy that he's aware himself that he will probably die in battle very shortly right near the walls of Troy. They also have an infant son, Astyanax, and Astyanax, unfortunately, is going to end up being killed because the Greeks, when they sack Troy, fear that Astyanax will be an avenger, and so he is tossed off a cliff. And that is depicted very dramatically in a play by Euripides, the tragic playwright, called The Trojan Women, in fact. That's also, by the way, the name of an opera by the later composer Berlioz called Les Troyens. So Andromache is in fact one of the most remarkable heroines of the Greek world. Ironically, she's not even Greek. She's actually Trojan, but she becomes effectively Greek because she comes to Greece, and she actually ends up marrying a man named Helenus, and after some other misadventures, and eventually ends up having a relatively happy life. But it's really quite wrenching to see how she has to suffer the loss of her city, and especially witnesses the mistreatment of the body of Hector by the warrior Achilles, as you're going to read in tomorrow's text, Homer's Iliad. So that's a brief summary of heroes and heroines. The thing to take away from this is, notice how the heroes are in a position of taking initiative as the men, and heroines are in the position of passivity. Everything happens to them because it is a man's world, and they're able to resist and effect change, but it's very difficult for them to effect positive change in a way that really strengthens themselves. They're more reactive to circumstances because there really isn't much more that they're capable of doing because of the way that men have dominated the scene. So tomorrow we turn to Homer's two great works, Iliad and Odyssey. Please read them very carefully. These are two of the most magnificent pieces of literature we have from the ancient world. I realize that they will be long for you to read, but they definitely will be worth your time. We'll see you tomorrow.